People love simple stories. Stories like, Germany was broke, millions were unemployed, and then the Nazis came to power and, boom, the economy magically recovered. This is the lie that still survives in documentaries, textbooks, and even political speeches today. A lie repeated so often that people stop questioning it. A lie that sounds harmless until you realize what it was designed to hide. Because the so-called economic miracle wasn't an accident, wasn't natural recovery, and definitely wasn't the result of smart leadership. It was engineered, artificial, fabricated. A mirage built on a financial trick so bold, so bizarre, and so deeply hidden that even many economists missed the real story. A trick that turned jobs into political weapons and workers into state captives. A trick that governments still copy today, just in more polite, modernized ways. And the heart of this trick, the secret engine, was something almost nobody outside economic history has ever heard of. Mefo bills, a fake currency, a shadow credit system, an off-the-books way to fund an entire nation without ever admitting debt. It was the real power behind the regime, the real cause of job growth, and the real reason unemployment vanished. But it also became the trap that locked an entire country into obedience, because once your job depends on the state, as fiction, you stop questioning the fiction. In this video, we're going to break it all down piece by piece. Not with boring lectures, not with dusty textbook language, but with the real mechanics. So by the time you finish, you'll understand how fascists weaponized employment, how they hid debt inside private companies, how they forced businesses to comply, how they tied people's survival directly to political loyalty, and how modern governments still recycle parts of this playbook. This is not a history lesson. This is a warning. Because once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Let's rewind to 1932. Germany isn't just struggling. It's collapsing. Factories are dead silent. Banks have failed. People line up for bread. Men who used to build ships or design engines are selling newspapers on corners just to survive. Unemployment? Over 30%. It didn't feel like a recession. It felt like the end of the world. Politicians promise recovery. Nobody believes them. People stop caring about left or right. They want hope, certainty, stability, anything. Enter the new government in 1933. Within months, the unemployment numbers begin to fall. Not slowly, not gradually, violently. From 6 million unemployed to 3 million, to 1 million, to full employment. A miracle, right? Except miracles don't exist in economics. Something was happening behind the curtain. Something big, something fast, something that should have been mathematically impossible. Germany had no money, no reserves, no gold, no credit, and no allies willing to lend to them. So how did they suddenly build highways, revive factories, restart steel production, and mobilize millions into brand new jobs? Simple. They cheated. But not the small kind of cheating. Not the tax evasion kind. Not the creative accounting kind. This was cheating on an industrial scale. The kind of cheating that required rewriting how money works. Imagine a government that's broke. Not low on funds. Not running a deficit. Flat out broke. Now imagine that same government telling companies, we want you to build tanks, aircraft, roads, equipment, steel plants, synthetic fuel labs, anything we need, and we'll pay you later. Would you trust them? Of course not. You'd want cash, real cash, money that exists. But this government had no money. So they invented something else. A new kind of payment that wasn't money, but acted like money, and could be turned into money, but wasn't recorded as money. A financial ghost. This ghost had a name, Mefo bills. Here's how they worked. The government secretly created a fake company on paper. That company issued IOUs to businesses. Businesses accepted the IOUs because they were guaranteed by the state. Banks agreed to treat these IOUs as cash. The government spent billions without adding a single mark to the official debt. To the outside world, Germany looked stable, disciplined, fiscal, responsible. Inside the system, they were printing future debt like candy. Businesses kept producing. Workers kept earning. Unemployment numbers fell. Factories roared back to life. And the public saw the transformation as proof. See? This government cares. This government delivers. This government brought back jobs. But they didn't bring back jobs. They manufactured jobs using invisible credit. They turned unemployment into a political tool. They bought loyalty with work. They tied survival directly to the regime's financial illusion. And most people had no idea because most people don't read the footnotes of national budgets. At first, businesses loved it. They got paid. Production increased. Workers returned. Profits rose. But slowly, very slowly, they realized they were trapped. Because the IOUs they accepted, the MEFO bills, had an expiration date. One day, they would have to be redeemed. One day, the government would have to pay real cash. And everyone knew the truth. The government didn't have real cash. Billions and billions in hidden obligations were piling up off the books. But if companies refused to accept new MEFO bills, production would stop. Jobs would disappear. The miracle would collapse overnight. And the public would panic. So refusing wasn't an option. Not if you wanted to keep your factory, or your workers, or your safety. Because in fascist systems, economics is never just economics. The state gladly reminds you of that. Companies that cooperated got contracts. Companies that hesitated got visits. Companies that resisted were replaced. By this point, the government didn't need loyalty. They had something stronger: dependence. When your entire business is financed by government IOUs, when your workers depend on those IOUs, when your future is tied to that secret credit system, you don't rebel. You comply. You keep the machine running, and the machine gets bigger. Jobs are supposed to give freedom, income, stability, options, the ability to walk away from bad conditions or bad leaders. But here, the job itself became a weapon. Because the state didn't just create jobs, it controlled the source of jobs, and workers understood the stakes. If you lost your job in the system, you didn't just become unemployed. You became suspicious, unpatriotic, lazy, a problem. Your survival wasn't connected to your skills anymore. It was attached to the political machine. This is the part people forget. The regime didn't demand love. It demanded dependence. And dependence is far stronger than ideology. If your paycheck comes from the state, and your boss depends on the state, and your industry is financed by the state, and your community stability comes from the state, then opposing the state is simply too expensive. People don't become loyal, they become trapped. A trapped population doesn't protest. A trapped population doesn't argue. A trapped population doesn't think in moral terms. It thinks in survival terms. Which is exactly what the state wanted. Because once you're financially trapped, you don't ask questions like, where's this money coming from? Why are we spending so much? Is this sustainable? You ask only, will I still have a job tomorrow? And that is how jobs were weaponized. Not by force, not by violence, not by propaganda, by financial engineering, by a shadow system of credit so massive that everyone was connected to it whether they knew it or not. Everything up to this point has been the setup, the context, the stage. Now we enter the part almost no documentary, no classroom, no mainstream historian ever explains properly. The part where the entire system was built on a financial mechanism designed to fail. And the twist is this: the so-called economic miracle wasn't created by good policy, or genius economic strategy, or a decisive leader. It was created by a secret, parallel financial system operating outside the official banking sector. A system run through a fake corporation, staffed by almost no one, owned by no one, audited by no one, monitored by no one. This system had one job: convert national debt into invisible private credit. That's it. This is the part so absurd. You'd think it came from a satire, except it was real. A shell company with no office, issuing promissory notes with no backing, guaranteed by a government with no money, treated by banks as real currency, funding national-scale projects. This wasn't a flaw. It was the plan. And here's the twist. The person who designed this mechanism wasn't a military general, wasn't a politician, wasn't an economist in the traditional sense. He was a former steel industry executive named Jalmar Schacht, a man who understood something few people did at the time. If you control the flow of credit, you don't need to control the flow of cash. This was the key, the hinge, the hidden power. Schacht didn't need gold. He didn't need reserves. He didn't need balanced budgets. He needed belief. Belief from banks, belief from companies, belief from workers, belief from the public. Because if everyone believed the system worked, then the system worked. Until it didn't, Schacht built the mechanism. He engineered the recovery. He turned unemployment into political obedience. But he also left behind the one document that revealed the real danger. And you want to believe the name he warned about the person who would later weaponize the system far beyond anything he intended. But to understand that, we need to go deeper. Much deeper. Into the mechanics themselves. You've heard the surface-level explanation, but now we tear the machine open. Here's the simplest way to understand the mechanism. The government printed promises instead of money and forced everyone else to act like the promises were money. Let's break it down. Step 1. Create the illusion of a private company. The government created a ghost corporation. No factory, no employees, not even a real address. Its entire purpose: to act as a middleman for debt. Why a private company? Because if the government issued the IOUs directly, it would instantly reveal the debt explosion. Foreign governments would panic, investors would run, confidence would collapse. But if a private company did it, it stayed off the books, invisible, unregulated, unquestioned. Step 2. Issue bills that function like money. These promissory notes, the MEFO bills, had a twist. They paid interest 4%. They matured in 5 years. Banks were told they must accept them. Companies were told they should accept them. And if push came to shove, the central bank would convert them into cash. In other words, they weren't money, but they might as well have been. This created a shadow money supply. And the numbers were shocking. At the peak, over 12 billion marks were in circulation via MEFO bills. For perspective, the entire official national budget was just 6 billion. That means 2/3 of the economy was running on invisible credit that didn't appear in any official financial report. Let that sink in. Step 3. Tie industry to the ghost credit system. Now the trap gets tighter. Once companies accepted MEFO bills, their payroll depended on them, their suppliers depended on them, their banks depended on them, their survival depended on them. This is what economists call path dependency, a polite term for you can't escape without dying. If a company refused new contracts, the government could collapse their financing overnight. If a company complained, they were accused of sabotage. If a company asked for cash instead of bills, they were labeled disloyal. This wasn't economics. This was economic coercion. Step 4. Inflate employment without inflating prices. This is the part modern governments quietly admire. The credit injection was enormous, but it didn't trigger inflation. Why? Because the money wasn't entering consumer markets. It was locked inside. Factories, infrastructure, industrial expansion, rearmament, synthetic resource projects, workers gained jobs, not cash windfalls. Productivity rose, output rose, but consumer spending stayed stable. This created the illusion of stability. Sound familiar? It should, because this is exactly how modern quantitative easing works. Inflate asset markets, keep wages flat, prevent consumer inflation, make people feel stable, but never financially free. It's the same trick, just with smartphones and nicer suits. Step 5. Kick the bomb down the road. The MEFO bills had a fatal flaw. They had to be paid back. And as the bills piled up billions upon billions, a simple truth became impossible to ignore. There was no way to repay them without hyperinflation, mass default, or a massive external source of income. Guess which option the regime chose? Exactly. They planned to expand outward, to seize resources, to acquire territory, to loot economies, to extract wealth. Because when your economic engine is built on a lie, the only way to sustain it is to steal reality from someone else. And the person who understood this best was the one Schacht feared most. Here is the part people rarely talk about. The architect of the credit illusion, Hjalmar Schacht, eventually realized his creation had been hijacked, not by bankers, not by industry, not by technocrats, but by a political operator who understood something brutal. If jobs are created by the state, then the state can demand anything in return. The person Schacht warned about? Hermann Göring. Yes, that Göring. The flamboyant, arrogant, drug-addicted opportunist with no economic training whatsoever. Göring saw something Schacht hadn't. MEFO bills weren't just a financial tool. They were a political weapon. A weapon that could buy loyalty. A weapon that could silence criticism. A weapon that could bind entire industries to the regime. Schacht wanted control. Göring wanted obedience. And Göring got it. He created the 4-year plan, which was less a plan and more a takeover of the entire industrial sector. He used the MEFO system to nationalize industries through debt, reward loyal companies, punish hesitant ones, centralize control, and crush dissent beneath economic necessity. He didn't understand the economics. He didn't need to. He understood the power. Here are the real numbers, the ones almost no mainstream. Source talks about 1.12 billion marks in mefo bills. Off the books. Invisible. Equivalent to $240 billion today. 2. Official national debt reported as only 19 billion marks, meaning over 40% of obligations were hidden. 3. Unofficial estimates show total shadow obligations reached 30 to 35 billion marks, nearly double the public debt. 4. Industrial output jumped 207% in 5 years. Completely impossible without hidden credit. 5. Over 60% of all new jobs were funded by mefo mechanisms, meaning the employment miracle was literally a credit mirage. This wasn't sustainable. It wasn't stable. It wasn't economic recovery. It was a bubble engineered for political power, backed by coercion, deception, and eventually military aggression. By 1938, the bomb was ticking. Billions in mefo bills were coming due. Banks wanted repayment. Companies needed liquidity. Credit markets were tightening. Reality was catching up. And the regime faced a choice: default or expand. We all know which choice they made. This isn't history. This is economics turned into fate. When a society becomes dependent on artificial credit for survival, the political system radicalizes automatically. People stop thinking. They cling to stability. They defend the illusion that feeds them. They rationalize the system because the alternative is collapse. This is why jobs became weapons. Because once employment was tied to political power, loyalty wasn't ideology, it was survival. Here's the part that matters most. The mechanism didn't die. It evolved. Today's governments don't call them mefo bills. They use cleaner language. Quantitative easing, off-balance sheet liquidity, shadow banking, private credit expansion, special purpose vehicles, serialized bond purchases, liquidity facilities, swap lines. The grammar changed. The power didn't. Look at the patterns. Shadow credit grows faster than official debt. Sound familiar? Governments claim stable growth while hiding liabilities. Sound familiar? Corporations rely on state-backed liquidity to survive downturns. Sound familiar? Workers are tied to fragile industries that depend on government guarantees. Sound familiar? The technique is the same. Use invisible credit to create artificial stability. Then hope nobody asks where the money comes from. And just like the past, there's a catch. You can postpone the collapse, but you can't prevent it. Not forever. Shadow systems are built on one thing: belief. Once belief cracks, the whole structure goes with it. Fast. So here's the truth you won't hear on TV. The past wasn't about one country losing its mind. It was about a financial mechanism pushing a society into desperation, obedience, and eventually, destruction. The real lesson isn't ideological. It's structural. If a government can fabricate prosperity through hidden credit, it can fabricate dependency. And if it can fabricate dependency, it can fabricate obedience. That's the danger. Not the flags, not the uniforms, not the speeches, the credit. Because the credit becomes the cage. Look around today. Rising debt, stagnant wages, shadow markets bigger than real markets, central banks acting as the buyer of last resort, governments terrified of admitting the true numbers. We are living inside our own mefo system, just with better branding. The next collapse will not be local. It will not be slow. And it will not be political at first. It will be financial, then psychological, then social. History does not repeat, but the mechanisms do. The question now is, are we wiser? Or are we just walking the same path? In better suits? If this opened your eyes, share it not for me, but for the people who still trust the illusion. And if you want more deep dive breakdowns of the systems built on borrowed time, subscribe. Because the truth doesn't come from institutions. It comes from people who can't afford to be lied to anymore.